And this is item 9 on the agenda. And this is governance services, best value service review of operations, regulatory services. And David's going to speak to this one.
Thanks, Provost. Thanks, members. Not keep you any longer than is required. This is the first of a number of reports we'll be presenting this afternoon, but this one presents the outcome of our review of particularly operations and regulatory services. I'll start by giving a little bit of the background and the context in terms of where we've been, governance and what the bringing together of governance and operations and regulatory, because it's always important to have regard to where we've been when we're taking decisions about the future. And in that regard, having regard to where we've been this morning, apologies, we have no video here, but I can assure you I love my job too, even if it doesn't always show. And more importantly, so do the majority of staff in governance, excuse me, because we don't let them in if they don't. So, and the other one was in relation to the discussion around AI. If and when the computer is built that wants to come and do my job, I'll be more than happy to make way. So just in terms of this paper then, the paper sets out in the initial background section standard context to best value review, the Council's policy and arrangements, the 4 Cs, challenge, consult, compare and consider. I'll draw your attention just to paragraph 7. That just tells you the full remit of governance just now. We are legal and licensing, we are procurement, we are information governance, which covers FOI, GDPR and records management. We are democratic, which is, as you can see, committee services, member services, elections, records management service as well, registration services, council officers, reprographic services, grants and renewable energy fund. Within regulatory, we have environmental health and trading standards under a single service manager following previous service reviews, and in operations or planning, but it is more than planning. We have the development management arm of planning, we have building standards, administration and technical support, and I'll come back to the rest of planning as part of the presentation. In terms of that historical context, it's helpfully set out in paragraph 8, and should that AI ever come and ever make way for it, then comms just need to look there, because that's my bitchery in terms of everywhere we've been, because I have been the presiding chief officer throughout all of that, for good or for bad. If it's bad, don't tell me. But in relation to governance, we were admin and legal from 2000 actually through to 2003. Procurement joined us following that review in 2003 and have remained with us for what doesn't feel like 20 years. Then in 2006, actually admin and legal were separated. Admin got a bit lofty, changed their title to democratic and tried to pretend they didn't know legal and moved away. Procurement were still with us, and regulatory services came in the form of environmental health, as I say, trading standards, and that licensing there is the civic licensing, because that was used to be done separately. We were alcohol licensing, we ran the board in legal, which was a kind of model in most unitary authorities, and then on a previous service review, part of what was the old community services, which was the community safety and licensing, was split up. Community safety went into what is now Blair Service, and licensing, the civic licensing, the taxis also came in. That function now is now carried out without any of the original staff. We have subsumed it into the staff body we had, because that is what we do as we go. In terms of the next change, 2009, then that was simply where regulatory came under the one. That was our last service review at that time. Not our last, it was 14 years ago, but at that time. And that tweaked and brought us to one manager as part of a further review. And then, as it says there, in 2014, Estates had joined us and left us at that point. And then Democratic came back in, but that was with effect from 16. But to make way for that, regulatory then moved out or over to what was planning economic development in 16. Then you had a further review, sorry, I jumped ahead, where estates transferred out to facilities and property management from April 21. That was more in the back of the FPMS service review than NOR at that time. And then you had review of council management structure as led by Eddie after coming into post. And that obviously was informed by some of the decisions that had already been taken prior to Eddie taking post. And his management structure report that was approved by council in June 21 approved the proposal that most of planning and building standards and regulatory be transferred to governance with effect from August-September 2021. And we had more recently unilaterally carried out a review within member services prior to the last election and have since implemented those changes. And I'll quickly move on before anyone tries to tell me otherwise. And going back to the planning element, just to remind you, the provost mentioned there, so I'll get in now, Strathclyde Regional Council in a different context. It takes you back though, just to explain that the development planning element is the big picture. That's the process by which the relevant authority, which is now the unitary authority, sets out the local policy. So you have government set out national planning policy, you have the local development plan. That's the big picture against which your development management function receive and validate, assess and determine applications through the committee structure against the big plan. The point about mentioning the region is for those of us who are old enough, which is probably most is, but prior to 1996, the region, Strathclyde region, was obviously one of the two tiers. The region was a regional planning authority. The region then set each regional council set the development plan. So that separation that you see now, and I appreciate it begs the question, why not put it all under one roof? There's good reason for that in terms of it's one of the biggest Chinese walls outside the Great Wall of China that you'll see, because you actually had the function of setting the plan, sitting with the regional authority, and the function of determining local applications or applications against the plan, mainly sitting with the locals. But the region, I think from memory, did have some function at determining bigger or more strategic applications. So that split has been there since before 96. That split then had to be accommodated within single unitary authorities taking on all planning functions from 96, and it's always been the practice, it's a practice in every council in Scotland, is to still have that separation between the team of planning professionals that deliver your plan and the team of planning professionals who determine applications against the plan, to avoid that crossover or contamination in terms of those setting the plan being too fixed in their application and interpretation of the plan, but having a role of consultees. So we'll come to the structure chart later, but that's a long way of saying that the development planning arm sits within the policy and projects team led by Karen Purvis and reporting into David McDowell as your head of economic growth. So that's the kind of background. In terms of the order of the report, what I would like to do is I find the structure a little bit bitty because we go through the 4 Cs. The content is there. What I'm going to do is try and address this by service rather than by sections of the report, because it kind of has a bit more piecemeal jump about. If I can take you firstly then to planning. They're set out there in terms of paragraph 14. Well, operations is planning, building standards and the admin and technical support. What you have there, I'll quickly show you at page 234 in appendix 1. These are not big services by any means, and I should stress that while that's the current structure as is set out in the report at any given time, that is never a fully populated structure because of the kind of recruitment issues and challenges that we face that I can come back to as we go through this. So the structure of operations, as you can see, is development management to the left, and there are 3 teams at the moment: energy, minerals and general southern, and general developments northern. There is building standards. They're split into 2 teams on a geographical basis, north and south, and then there's admin and technical support. Throughout the last 2 years, our priority within operations has been to basically try and steady the ship. That's not to say it was in a bad way, but members will know that the council took a major dunt in 2013 with the open cast. That cost the service. We lost the head of service in the back of that. There was then a change to another head of service, lighter touch regime might be best said, and then they've had a lot to recover from. Also, more importantly, after the departure of the last head of planning and economic development, then the overall responsibility for all these services sat with Mr McDowell as the acting operations manager at that time, but obviously going back to Eddie's paper in June 21, he then was moved into, he became head of economic growth after that post was created and recruited to in accordance with process. What does all that mean? From what that means is basically after David McDowell became the head of economic growth, we needed to appoint an interim operations manager, and that was David Wilson, who's in the room today, who was the former team leader in the energy team. So to be fair to David, he's had to hit the ground running because he wasn't that long in the team leader post before he became inter-operations manager, which means I'm not a planner, but as chief governance officer, it's all been done in my name. But I've been trying to provide support and direction to David and the team, and to support David as he's finding his feet, which he's done remarkably well over the last couple of years, and building that experience. And he's at quite a rapid learning curve, I think, but all to the good. So in terms of these arrangements, we have looked at this actively. In terms of planning in the first instance, I believe and commend to you that the three-team structure is currently still the right structure. It actually used to be energy, minerals in the past, and general developments, but we have reviewed and in the recent past, and because of the bulk of the workload in the general developments team, we then split that into the minerals team, because as there's a reduction in the minerals type work with the demise of the open cast post 2013, then there was scope to get a better balance, which has benefited all members of both of those teams. So at the moment, the thinking remains that it is a benefit to retain the three-team structure. We have many applications in relation to the energy team. We have all the wind farmed applications. We're seeing more as other forms of technology, etc., develop, hydrogen capture, battery energy storage, etc. They are big, they are complex, they are challenging, and they're always being presented by folk who have multi-billion-dollar commercial deals to sign up to last week and need their conditions discharged. So at the moment, the level of volume of the major applications is such that I believe that the three-team structure remains the right one for planning. In terms of building standards, the team structure, as I say, is split on a geographical basis, and I think for the range and nature of the work and the requirement of management oversight, we are of the view that that also remains fit for purpose. And then you have the admin and technical support team, and what I would say there is they do service, development management and building standards. So it's one team administering basically the early stages of two separate statutory processes. So they receive all the planning applications, make sure everything's in order, validate them, check and process the fees and all the other attachments, send letters to people saying you've missed something, etc. And they do that also for building standards. So we have a centralised shared admin and technical support resource, and I think it would actually be counterproductive to split that up to support the individual teams. So it's one support team and two professional services. I would actually, in terms of building standards, again, I go back to my colleague, David McDowell, was cut his teeth, if you like, as a surveyor by trade, came up through our building standards team, having joined for North Ayrshire. David is an exceptional manager. I can say that now because he's away, but he's an exceptional manager, and under his management over many years, building standards is in an excellent position. There are two twin peaks there that keep them in fine fettle and fit for purpose. The first one is that in the early days, David was instrumental in implementing ISO, well, one of the ISOs, I don't know them, but 501, but one of the ISO standards, and they continue to maintain that. And the other aspect, which is kind of unique to building standards, and it's touched on in the report, is Scottish Government also have a very formal and very rigorous accreditation scheme by which every so often they have to satisfy themselves that our staff are competent as certifiers of the matters they deal with under building standards, and the approval comes in series of either 5 or 6, maybe 7 years, and the last approval was through. So they're again accredited and meeting all requirements of Scottish Government as a modern fit for purpose building standard service. And the only other aspect there is a positive is even more recently the service, and it's in the report, we're actually in receipt of a Scottish Government Award for Excellence as a building standards service. So against that backdrop, I said I would take them service by service. I'm not going to say much more about building standards. And in terms of the recommendations, in terms of where there might be room for improvement there is over the last 2 years only one area that's arisen. I wouldn't say identified, it kind of hard to miss, but there's only one area where there's room for improvement, and that is the arrangements around our response to call-outs. And I won't get into detail here, but it's reflected in the recommendations, and we just need to tighten that up and make sure that when SFRS colleagues are calling us out, that it's for a proper purpose, and that having agreed that if we're called out, the point I'm making is there's been occasions when colleagues get called out in the middle of the night because a building's on fire, and they're no better placed to go into that building than anyone else. So it almost seemed to be protocol. There's a burning building, phone for building standards, and then they stand about like everyone else watching till the flames go down and it's safe to go in the morning. So what we're trying to get is the balance that when we're called out, we've got a function and a purpose to being called out, and the quid pro quo is if we're called out under that new arrangement or revised protocol, then we need to be able to respond. And we've got a bit of work going on there, feeding into the bigger review that Ayrshire are leading on the overall standby arrangements and call-out arrangements within the council. In essence, at the moment, we don't have standby and call-out arrangements. We are relying on the good faith of staff, which was probably a reasonable arrangement when my colleague, Mr McDowell, was in charge of building standards, and he basically responded to all the call-outs. But we are in a different position now, and I'd rather avoid getting into a full 365 arrangement on standby payments, because the number of call-outs aren't that bad, but we do need to get a balance so that when we are called out, we can respond effectively. So that's just the one action there that I'm looking to take forward through the recommendations with Council's approval. In terms of planning and development management itself, then, as I said, we've reviewed the teams. We believe the teams are right. There are massive recruitment challenges and regulatory as well when we get to it, but there's just not enough planners. There's not even enough planners for the private sector. So we are all robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it does have an impact. That energy team looks great, but until I think 2 weeks ago, that energy team was basically Graham Mitchell filling in for David Wilson as the team leader, and nobody else. Sorry, the enforcement officer, well, actually, strictly speaking, the enforcement officer retired in July, but I'll come to the enforcement team. But the 3 senior planners and the planning officer were all vacant. They're all needed, but they were all vacant because of the recruitment challenges we've had. And it's not about going out and running exercise, it's about getting strong enough and capable and competent applicants. If they don't come forward, you can't appoint. So, as I say, although that looks heavy, and that'll come back to the bit around the costs, the bottom line is there that for a long time that was simply one person who is one of the seniors who was acting up to the team leader while David's acting up to the operations manager. We have since been able to recruit a senior planner in there, and we have moved over a planning officer from the Northern General Developments team to support the work I was talking about in terms of the heavy exercise of discharging very detailed and complex conditions for a number of major developments under the pressure of commercial deals sitting at the back of that need to be met, and therefore all conditions need to be discharged by a particular timescale. The timescale is the applicants, and they need to own that as well in terms of giving us the information we need to discharge the conditions. So in terms of planning then, there are a number of other matters that the report sets out. There has been recent legislation which we will take account of, the Planning Act. That made a number of changes. The main one was the requirement now for the introduction of a statutory chief planning officer. So we will take that forward. So just in terms of the recommendations for planning, the first one is a general one that we will implement and amend the scheme of DELs to take account of the matters set out in the Planning Act. I'll touch briefly. We say in the paper there is now new regulations, separate regulations that came in last April on the planning fee framework. But as members will have seen, we've got a separate paper on that next in the agenda. So I'll leave that for that. But hopefully it's straightforward here, and then we'll deal with the fee proposals in the next paper. The main one that to touch on here, and the main reason for bringing this paper direct to council, is it takes council to approve the creation of the new chief planning officer post, which is proposed, and as set out in the paper. It's going through job evaluation at the moment. I just need to finalise that with HR colleagues, but the expected grade will be grade 17. There isn't any higher grades, so there's no further financial implications, but it is expected to come in at 17. We've had regard to the Act, we've had regard to the guidance, and we've had regard to all relevant matters, and we setting out the proposal here. And if I can just turn you to page 236, members, Appendix 3. And it's just to give you an idea of where we see this fitting in. So starting with myself, just to make sense, as Chief Governance Officer, I obviously report to Eddie as Chief Executive, as my line manager. The Chief Planning Officer will become the new senior lead in the operations service. They will be responsible for development management, building standards, admin and technical support. They will report to the Chief Governance Officer on pay and rations in terms of that full line, but to recognise the absolute fact that they will be your senior planning advisor. Then they will have direct authority, and that's what the chart shows, and that's what we're asking council to approve, that your chief planning officer, just as auditors do and just as I do as monitoring officer, with the broken lines, the planning officer will have the autonomy to be reporting direct to council on all matters concerning planning, including the development plan side of matters. They have the broken line to planning committee, and then the reason you have the broken line from development planning is, as I've said, they're simply sitting, as I explained earlier, under the head of economic growth, and I would recommend we maintain that separation for the reasons I touched on. So we're just giving the full width. So in relation to the development plan, that will be done in the name and on behalf of and with the support and input of the Chief Planning Officer. So basically, Karen Purvis is at the moment, and that role will report into the Chief Planning Officer. So that's the proposed arrangements of where they would sit in the structure, and that's what we're asking Council to approve. If you do approve it, we will seek to recruit, and the ambition is to have us fully up and running by no later than the end of the financial year, so we can start the next financial year with the Chief Planning Officer in post and start to implement some of the other improvement actions and continue the job of maintaining what is an improving performance within planning, excuse me, and continue to make the challenges of recruitment and reducing budgets that are the same for everybody. So that's the proposal in relation to the Chief Planning Officer. In terms of just taking back through the recommendations, in terms of some of the other proposals around planning, you will see we talk on, there's two different benchmarking. There is the general local government benchmarking paper or arrangement, and that throws up, and that's reflecting one of the recommendations that yes, on a comparative basis with everyone else, this is at paragraph 78 onwards, it is acknowledged that we would appear to be at the higher end in terms of the cost per planning application. What I've always found with benchmarking is everybody loves benchmarking until they end up at the bottom of the tree, and then everyone starts to rubbish benchmarking and point out it's apples and pears and they do it different from us and it's not a true comparison, etc., etc. I'm not making that case. You can't have your cake and eat it. What I would say is that the cost per application doesn't always necessarily take account of what kinds of applications you're dealing with, and there's a big difference between a house or a housing development and a wind farm or a battery energy storage station or a hydrogen plant or any of the other big and major applications that we receive. So we need to be staffed up to deal with the business, and that is a greater priority because we are in a position where if we weren't delivering the service, we would be at risk of holding up some major developments that are of local, national and indeed UK and potentially global, but certainly UK importance in terms of some of the energy projects, etc., etc. So we will work, and one of the recommendations is to work with finance colleagues to see what more we can do to drive down the cost of delivering the planning service. but equally it cannot be, and it will not be, unless you tell me different, at the expense of the quality of the service or the quality of the outcomes in terms of both decisions and the support to developers once consent's been granted to actually get them up and running and get them commencing construction and then operation. And as I say, that's actually, I've found in the last 2 years, the biggest area of challenge, even once you've got the decisions taken, is actually getting them over the line. And the more you park in conditions, the harder that becomes. That's not what we do here. We try and get as much up front, but there is always a range of pre-commencement conditions, a range of matters that need to be addressed. And that's a difficult dialogue, because we're pushing people for information, etc., and all they want to do is get ahead, get things signed up, get the due diligence done, get the commercial deals done, and then start operations. So there's a lot of activity in there, and we just need to meet those asks. And if it's a choice of holding up a global or a UK-wide energy project, or being a bit cheaper in what we do, then I know what choice I would make. However, we do need to look at it, and we will look at it with finance colleagues. We'll see where that extra cost appears to sit, and we'll see what we can do about it, and we'll bring back proposals on the outcome of that. Another one, just to touch on in terms of where we've looked in planning, we actually have currently fee enforcement officers, and you just see from the structure chart, they are allocated to individual teams. One is currently vacant, that was on the minerals side. The energy side, but we are recruiting to that. So we have fee at the moment, but they are allocated to those teams. Other councils, many other councils, don't have specific enforcement officers. They're dealt with by the planning case officers. So maybe that's where some of that hidden cost is. But as I think members will be aware from all the occasions when your constituents raise planning matters with you, that planning enforcement is alive and well in East Ayrshire. And there are many, many issues being raised on a regular basis that we currently have 2 members of staff to deal with across the area. So I would like to look at that, and I propose to look at that to see if we can do something to strengthen that, whether it's to bring the 3 of them together into a single team so that they're working more together and sharing that experience. Not to say they don't talk at the moment, and also whether there might be room to increase that capacity just now, on the basis that there will come a point when we reach saturation point, there will no more room in the hills for any more wind farms, and we can review it at a later date. But in order to do everything we need to do, and if I'm talking enforcement, I probably need to mention Snedden's Law to give the flavour of just how much business it brings to the council. So that action is just to, if you agree it, is just to allow me to have a further deeper look at what we might be able to do to further strengthen that enforcement offer, noting that the offer is far greater than many other councils do at the moment. But again, I'll take a steer from yourselves, but my recommendation to you is we don't reduce it, and if there's scope to do it on the planning income that we'll come to in terms of that, then maybe even to further strengthen that. But again, any proposals would come back to Cabinet or Council for, as appropriate, for approval, if you're happy to set us on that course. Think that's, and then finally there's a wee one there, the 12th recommendation. On that point, sorry, the recommendations refer to 12 recommendations, but I'm sure you'll notice there's actually 14. That was just a wee test. So recommendation 12, going back to that admin support team, there's a minor tweak there, because we had someone in charge, they went down to half a job, someone else took the other half a job, but is also at the moment operationally virtually been required to continue to carry out all the functions of their own job, plus that new half a senior job. So we just need to look at what we can do there to strengthen that admin resource, because we need to be smooth, we need to be efficient, and we need to get applications in, validated, and moving on to the case officers quickly and without delay. So it's an equally important part of the service. And again, I just want to look and see if we can tweak that to make sure we've got enough hands on deck, that we're not holding things up. Because that's people's first impression of us, is what happened to their application when they put it in for validation. And their first impression can often colour where we get to. So I'd like to strengthen that to make sure we're as efficient and effective as we can be at the front end, to get the applications in, to get them into the process, to get them determined, and get them out the other end. So those are the overall planning recommendations. I appreciate there is a lot in this, and it's been a long morning, so I won't go into any further detail. I'm happy to take any other questions. What I would say, just in conclusion, because I didn't quite finish it, the second kind of performance framework that's pertinent to planning, excuse me, is covered at page 224, paragraph 81 onwards, and that is where they specifically, and I get awfully confused with this because we've just been to GNS, Governance and Scrutiny Committee, with the outcome from 21-22, I think, but we already had in, I was at 21-22, we'd already had insight of the next year, and then we've just received the deep insight of 22-23. There's one red flag, so it's a step back, but it's a technicality because the red flag in the current performance framework for the 22-23 is the local development plan. So having talked up my colleague here, I'm now doing his legs in by saying it's his fault, but not really. It's an automatic one. If your LDP is more than 5 years and ours has been caught up in a process that's beyond our control, so we are automatically onto red flag because the LDP is caught up in a process that means it's more than 5 years out of date. And they're quite harsh with these flags in terms of it's a high threshold to get to green. Green's almost perfect, but the bottom line is over the last few years, it's been continuing improvement because we have been focusing on just bottom line service and performance and improvement. It's an improving picture, and we've maintained that other than the technical automatic red flag on the LDP. So performance is still strong, and what we're looking to do is not make changes for the sake of it, but make any further changes to how we provide the service in order to try and continue and maintain the current levels of performance, which are entirely down to David as team leaders, and David Wilson, the team leaders, and the rest of the planners. So that's planning. I've covered building standards. In terms of regulatory, I made the point earlier, it is helpful to understand where we've been. If I take you back to the information at paragraph 8, we had already been together. Regulatory had come in before, as I described, to whatever we were at that time, legal, procurement and regulatory. And at that time, we took the opportunity. So if I take you to the structure chart on Appendix 2, page 235, then you can see there that's the current structure. Previously, there were separate managers. There was an environmental health manager, there was a trade and standards manager. So one of the prior changes we've already made was to bring them under a single manager. That is my colleague Elaine Kavanagh, who's also present, along with David, for any difficult questions. Elaine is another exceptional manager that the council should be pleased to have working for us. And Elaine is happily in a position now that will come to continue to drive up performance and take the service forward. When we were together before, you see there the two teams, the pollution control and the corporate enforcement unit together, and then food safety and health and safety. Last time around, there were 3 teams. Food safety and health and safety were separate, with separate team leaders. And in that last round, back then, we took the opportunity to merge those 2 teams into a single team leader, which did cause me some nerves at the time because one of those made redundant went on to become a councillor here, and but he never held it against us, so he must have been quite happy. So in terms of those arrangements, my submission to you is there's really not much more or anywhere else to go in terms of that split. Pollution control and the unit will come to, but that is one discrete area of operation, and food safety and health and safety are actually 2, but they're under the one team leader. They sit well together, but there's no real scope to further amend or play about with those teams. It would just be rearranging the deck chairs, I think. So I'm satisfied again from discussions with colleagues in the service that the current structure is the correct structure, including trading standards and the team leader. Where we had benefit this time around was the previous team leader in the pollution control team made the ask whether or not he could actually step back from that post but continue working as an EHO, which we were absolutely happy to accommodate. date. And what that allowed was Elaine the opportunity to bring in a new team leader within the pollution control team. And obviously, as always, you get the impetus and the benefit of the impetus of a new pair of eyes and a new person coming in with their own experiences, etc. So Elaine now has a fully populated structure, a new team leader there, a good solid team leader in food safety, health and safety, and we also recruited to trading standards during our time, and that was Kevin Ferguson from South Ayrshire. So my position in terms of service review paper is I would suggest it's absolutely appropriate to retain the structure we have. Having said that, members are well aware of the corporate enforcement unit, and the story there was for many years it was a team of two that we funded from that previous service review initially, and then council was kind enough for a number of years to give us temporary funding for the third and fourth officers. And I'm not being funny about that. It was always appreciated. The difficulty, as we said before, with the temporary funding was people would come into temporary jobs at that grade, and when the opportunity came either within the council or elsewhere to get permanent employment, then they would move on. So although we had 4 posts with a lot of churn, much more than your 3% turnover, a lot of churn, and it's hard to develop a team if you're always bringing in new players and bringing them up to speed. So what we now have is a stable corporate enforcement team with 4 permanent officers, and what Elaine's going to do is take the opportunity as we try and answer that question of how do we either do less for more or more for less, or at least maintain service levels with reducing resource, is to see how we can better align the corporate enforcement unit with particularly the pollution control team, and maybe expand some of their activity so that they can be the initial visit, if you like. They can be the initial eyes and ears. We get an awful lot of asked to go out, and to be honest, a lot of the time we're asked to go out, we're going out to actually establish the facts so we can legitimately explain that we have no powers or no grounds to intervene in certain situations. So it'd almost be like a triage where the corporate enforcement unit, who are out and about anyway, might go and have that first look and then report back before we deploy an EHO at a higher cost. So we'll come back again with proposals for that, but that's covered in the recommendation of what we would like to look at in terms of regulatory. In terms of the other recommendations, the number 4, Appendix 5, sorry, they're all summarised at page 239. The report sets out the food safety service plan has been a big challenge. We set out in the paper how COVID, I know we don't want to mention it anymore, I certainly don't. I had it 4 weeks ago and I'm still getting over it, but the food safety service, the service was impacted on within COVID because they were actually a big part of our frontline response, not so much on the supporting communities, but in terms of enforcing all the regs that were brought in, etc., etc. So there was big demands made in them, and it also had an impact in normal business. Changes were made to the way the food safety services plan was to be produced, and they're now catching up in terms of government now getting that back to April. We've had a bit of a resource issue, as I said, simply because you cannot recruit again and regulate, particularly in environmental health, but also in trading standards. There aren't enough coming out, and Elaine spends most of her time coming up with ever more clever ways of trying to bring people in, be it as graduates, trainees. We do everything and anything we can to try and, if not grow our own, procure our own, develop our own, and we will continue to do that because it is a major challenge. Even if you gave us unlimited resources, I couldn't necessarily guarantee we'd be fully staffed at any given time. I suppose if we were paying about £1 million each, we maybe could, but we're not going to be doing that. So bottom line is that we are catching up with the food safety service plan. I'd ask you to note the challenges the service has faced, and can confirm that the food safety service plan for the current year will be coming to Cabinet, well, obviously November, because that'll be next week. So one of the cabinets in November. Getting there, nearly there. In terms of the other ones for environmental health, I've covered 7. Recommendation 7 is to further align the work of the team with the pollution control team, and the other ones for regulatory are 6, which is simply, again, we've set out, and I won't go into detail here, we will bring forward further reports, but the report sets out there's a whole further wealth of licensing coming around animal welfare that's going to impact on environmental health trading standards and the licensing team. but it's of such an order, we will need to just break that down, and we'll need to bring back papers as appropriate, setting out what the asks are and what the proposals are to meet them, and then what the ask is in terms of resources as appropriate in order to deliver on those. So it's just asking to note that there are legislative changes in play and coming, and to agree that we'll amend the scheme of DELs as we go with that. And in relation to trading standards, again, I'm not doing them justice because I'm conscious I've gone on very long, but there's a lot in here, and there's a lot in these services, and I'm trying to strike the balance of doing them a credit as well, because they do a lot of work, and it's not always fully seen. But in relation to trading standards, bottom line is the opportunity arose following the departure of a colleague. A lot of other councils had already taken the opportunity to divest themselves of consumer advice function, because on a national basis, Consumer Advice Scotland was brought into being several years ago, a good number of years ago now, and that gave councils the option of, do you provide a local community advice service, or do you refer customers to the national service? We had maintained a local service, but on the back of the departure of that colleague, and for all the other reasons that you can understand, the proposal is we'll line ourselves up with everyone else, and we are now proposing that we align ourselves to the national service, and that we instead focus on prevention and tackling criminal activity, and that role of trading standards, and allow the national body to continue to provide the consumer advice. So that's a further recommendation for those teams, and I think we've covered most of them. A couple at the end there is that we'll look at the system, won't get into detail, I'm a Luddite, but we'll look at the Northgate system in terms of how we can maybe better integrate, and also in planning as well, so that we've maybe got, as we go forward, better sharing of information across all the services. And then a wee housekeeping one at recommendation 14, we will be trying to revamp and improve on the online presence, and an online reporting facility for residents as well. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour through it. Apologies to David and Elaine, because there is large elements of what they do that have not been given space here, but I've tried to keep the focus on the service review, where we've been, what we've done, and in terms of Appendix 5, what we propose to do next. I hope, members, it meets with your satisfaction. Happy to take any questions, but joking apart, if there are any complicated ones, David and Elaine are here as well. Thanks, Provost, members.
No, thanks very much. When you've got a whole service review with all those aspects, that it is going to take a lot of time to explain it. So I'll open it up now. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Provost. And I would just start by declaring an interest in that I am a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. So it wouldn't surprise you that I will seek to defend the planning profession wherever possible. However, what I would say is, in broad terms, I support the review. It's not an easy one, and I absolutely feel your pain in recruiting planning officers or planning trained staff is a real problem, because we have a real problem in terms of undergraduate and postgraduate courses. And I think certainly the profession need to look ahead for that. And anything this council can do, I think it would be very much welcomed. I think just get on to Appendix 4A, and I think it is probably quite stark, and you did mention it, and I absolutely recognise we have a dedicated enforcement function in this council. It's something we've always had. And it is a hallmark, I think, of a good planning service. It isn't the case in every council, you're right. But in terms of the complexity of the type of applications received, when I look at Fife or Murray, Perth and Kinross, even South Ayrshire, they are very similar in terms of the applications and the range and nature. So the costs are, I think, of concern. You're going to bring a report back, and I think if you can give us timescales and bring a report back to Council or Cabinet, that would be useful. But I do know the absolute benefit of having a dedicated enforcement service. I don't think that can be overlooked or undermined in any way, members. So I note that the average time in terms of plan applications is sort of middling of the road, which is better than where you've been. So I think that's a good statistic, and hopefully one that can get better. But costs, I think, given we are mindful across the public sector and across this council of costs, it does seem very high in comparison to other authorities. But absolutely, Chief Planning Officer, it's something through legislation required to do. I think it's always something that I think has made sense, and good to see this coming in. Absolutely, no, in general terms, support the recommendation. I hear there was a lot of chat, I think, dedicated to planning, but that's not to take away the fantastic work of the rest of the regulatory service. And certainly I know from my dealings with our corporate enforcement team and environmental health, and I'm sure they cuss me at times, but, you know, I know how good they are, and I know they go above and beyond. We've had officers out at 5 and 6 in the morning to try and catch a particular culprit relative to a particular local issue in this ward before. So they do go above and beyond, and that's absolutely to be welcomed. And I think anything we can do as an authority to strengthen our corporate enforcement team, we should do that. But so that's one side of enforcement in terms of environmental health side, but the planning enforcement side, it would be, I think, a mistake of this council if we didn't have that dedicated service. So I welcome it. But something you can come back to zoning costs, because it's quite stark. I think you would agree. But otherwise, thanks, David, and I agree with the recommendation.
Just on the timescale, I appreciate the comments. Just on the timescale for that one, it's kind of left open. I mean, obviously, my preference would be if we can appoint the chief planner, they would get involved because they'll have more knowledge than I will. So it's down as 23-24, but working back, then if there is the opportunity to reduce the cost, then we would want to identify where that sits prior to next year's budget setting process, because as part of this year's budget setting, like Joe, I'm already losing sleep. We may just make what we need to make this year, and there's no special pleading here. Every colleague in every service is the same, but we will absolutely need an output from exercises like that if we are to continue to meet the demands of being made of us by all the circumstances that aren't necessarily in anyone's control. So within 23-24, I would be hoping we would have an output from that will then, you know, by this time next year, that would then feed in, no later than to feed into the budget setting, because if I can't take cost out with these kind of exercises, I don't know how I am, or we are. So.
Thanks, David. No, I absolutely appreciate that. One thing I would say, and I know from experience in other authorities, and again, I suppose declare that I was a former employee of this authority in the planning service, is that in terms of pay and conditions, you know, you look across local government, I look in some local authority areas and note that the pay from, I started as a planning officer 21 years ago, and in some local authority areas, they're not significantly higher than they were 21 years ago, and no wonder there is a recruitment problem when the private sector is offering quite considerable uplifts in that. So, you know, anything we can do. So, whilst I note the costs, I don't think you know, we have always been, as in terms of local government level, a good payer in terms of planning, and I think that's something you would want to do, because you want to maintain the best people you can.
Always, these are matters we are considering on a regular basis. In terms of the policy, strictly speaking, what they pay somewhere else isn't meant to be a trigger for re-evaluation. But we have to be competitive, so however it's presented, we will. We were aware in building standards in the last couple of years, for instance, that a near authority were doing an overhaul of their service. We anticipated the potential to lose staff to the seaside, and therefore we did a review. We went through a process of re-evaluation, and all the surveyors posts, the senior surveyors posts, the team leaders posts all went up by a grade. It wasn't a lot of money. It was less than £20,000 in cost, because they're not big services, but they do all punch above their weight. But the irony is that in terms of some of the improvement actions, they come with cost. We intend to do a review within environmental health for the same reasons, and I've absolutely no expectation that the re-evaluation will bring the cost down. And again, over and above meeting the central challenge of everyone being able to balance their budgets and live within what were properly allocated, again, to be competitive is going, potentially can cost money. It's not just about money, but it's one of the consequences. So you're in a circle whereby the budget's reducing, the demands are increasing, and the ability to recruit is a challenge, but to meet that challenge, you actually need to look at incurring greater costs. So it just all needs to be balanced out. But we have looked at, by building standards, it went up a grade. We will look at environmental health, and the intention is also to remit to the chief planning officer once appointed at some appropriate juncture, probably in conjunction with recommendation 9, an in-depth review of the planning cost indicators, is to see how we can work our way through that to both reduce costs while making sure we are competitive in what we pay. So. it's in progress, and as I say, we'll bring all of that back in due course. It will be in depth. We will need to work with planning colleagues, and I prefer the new chief planner, once appointed, take the lead in that.
Okay, thanks, folks. We okay? The recommendations to see what's coming back through the months ahead. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We're on to item 10 now. Back to David for the Scottish Planning application fees.
With your blessing, Provost and members, I will try and keep this short and to the point. I'm conscious, as I said, it's been a long day and I've just made it longer with the previous paper, but I think we did need to do justice to that. In relation to this one, in essence, as I touched on in the last paper, the regs referred to in paragraph 1 came out in 2022. The first of them is that the Scottish Government are looking to enable councils to become more back to cost, more self-sufficient, if you like, and to make sure they're well resourced and to tweak local fees and have a bit more discretion over local fees than has maybe been the case in the past, in order to try and provide a greater income to contribute to the resource required to provide the best quality service. So we're all working to the same objective of doing the best we can with the resources we have, and what this actually does is let us just add a little bit more to reflect the actual work undertaking all these different applications and to try and get to a better level of recovery against that cost. So hopefully this may well eat into that marker that we were talking about in the context of the last paper. I will try and cut this to the absolute quick. So taking it to the recommendations in terms of, and again, I'm not doing justice to the paper that was carefully prepared by David Wilson, but cutting to the quick, what we're proposing is under these new discretions in terms of as a new charge for non-material variations of planning applications. So at the moment you pay your main fee, you get your consent, you get whatever, and then you decide you want to change a wee bit of it. That's a section 42, non-material. It's meant to be lighter touch, etc. But some of them can be quite complex in themselves. There's still time and work and resource expended on them. So what we're basically seeking to do there is set out in paragraph 13, quite short and summary, is for the non-material variations, we're proposing to introduce a charge of £50 where it's a household development, £100 for local developments and £200 for major developments. As I say, they are currently no charge, and that's the charges we're proposing to bring in on that policy initiative of trying to recover more of our cost in order to continue to provide a solid service. So that's the first recommendation, is that those be brought in where there is no charge at the moment, and I think they are reasonable and proportionate. There's no major impact on the householders at £50, £100, £200. The paper sets out clearly that £200 is the maximum. I'd be happy to charge the major developers a lot more, but our hands are tied. So we take the ceiling figure against the big commercial companies and we take a lower figure against the other two. So that's the first recommendation, or the first bullet point, recommendation 1. The second one is we're proposing charges for applications for the approval of matters specified in conditions. I go back to what I said earlier, which wasn't just salted in for this point, but the bottom line is that it might be quite simple. It might be the usual matters. It might be a straightforward housing development. There's the construction traffic management plan. There's what we're doing with the lighting and everything else. But a lot of the likes of the battery energy, the one that we've got at the moment, and there's several others, where they've been done for the first time. There's no tried and tested path to trod. Therefore, there is a lot more time and effort spent in trying to get what we need from the applicant and them having that knowledge and experience of what's required in order to discharge the conditions. That's a long way of saying there's an awful lot of work in some of those, so we are proposing to bring in a charge. That's set out at paragraph 19, and the proposal is to apply a charge of £100, where at the moment there's no charge. In terms of the third bullet point, I revised the fee charge for pre-application advice, and let me assure you now, members, there is absolutely no intent to reintroduce the great dilemma of Mrs McGlumfer's shed. Council previously declined to introduce a householder pre-application advice fee, and we are happy to maintain that position. However, in relation to some of the other situations where pre-application advice is sought, then try to read more in writing. Paragraph 9 sets out what we are now proposing, and that's a nice simple one because we're now proposing to double the current fee. to double the current fee for those pre-application discussions. We set out in 6, 7 and 8 what they are, and we're just proposing to take the opportunity to double those for the formal pre-application advice, subject to the maximum that was in the regs. 2 more. On the 4th bullet point, we have for the first time, again, I think this will be of interest to members, anyone that's sat in the planning committee will have heard the question being asked, then where's the incentive for people to do things in the right order and get their consent before they build their extension, if when you build the extension and then apply for consent, there's no penalty. It's not done as a penalty, but it does reflect the fact that retrospective applications usually get more people annoyed, usually attract more objections, more heat, and there is therefore a legitimate justification in proposing a surcharge on retrospective applications. So that question can now be answered. The incentive to get in and get your consent before you build is you'll save 25% in the fee on top. So that's set out in paragraph 27. And then the final one is, and I know there's a good degree of member interest here, for the first time, the regulations allow us, subject to setting out in a charter all of this and putting the charter on the website. The charter doesn't need any statutory consultation, so it's not a prolonged process, but it does need to be approved here and go on the website before we can then implement any of the proposals. The regs in 2022 gave us authority to either waive or reduce the fees for certain developments. That's where they've been undertaken by a social enterprise or charitable or not-for-profit organisation, and there are discernible health benefits to the proposed development. In those circumstances, applications or applicants that meet the test, we are proposing a 50% reduction of what would be the fee that they would otherwise pay. Appreciate there's been a lot of interest here, but there's not that much interest because there's only about 3 other councils in Scotland that have already trod this path and have already gone down this route, and they have all gone for a 25% reduction. I'm certainly not trying to outdo them, but we believe we can accommodate a 50% reduction, but I would canvass caution members and urge that we don't try and go any further with that, given the previous discussion we've had through these 2 papers around resources matching the need. Then I would ask you don't put us in a position where we're working for free on any application, because that resource could be used elsewhere. So we reckon we can accommodate them at 50%, and that's set out in paragraph 23. So if we just focus on the number of the proposals, the report absolutely sets out clearly the context to each one. I'll stop there, Provost, and if there's any questions or queries, I'm happy to take them.
No, thank you. It's clearly set out there, and we'll open it out. Councillor Mackay.
Thanks very much. David, in terms of the retrospective applications, obviously I've sat on planning, as you know, for very many years. 25% increase. I don't see anything which says that we are limited to that. I am afraid would take a stronger line than that, and I would want to increase that on page 247 to 50%.
Just as well I brought David along. David, do you want any comment on that one?
Yeah, thanks. Just to comment on that, the legislation limits the 25% increase, so whilst it might be desirable, we've went to the maximum that's allowable.
That's absolutely fine. I just didn't see it within the preceding paragraphs, David. Thank you for that.
Apologies, I was just trying to find it. It's in paragraph 25, Councillor Mackay. I was looking for the figure, but we've said it in words. So it's, this surcharge cannot exceed 1/4. So we're taking the maximum.
I would have agreed with you, Maureen. So, no, folks, any further questions? We're okay with this, right? Thanks very much, David. I think a lot of people are going to be happier when there is some sort of sanction against somebody that's planning before getting in. Yeah, Deputy Provost, yes.
I was trying to work out what you were pointing at, Councillor Douglas. Councillor Jones.
Oh, see it, yeah. Yeah, Councillor Jones, thank you.
Thanks, Provost. It's really just to ask David, in terms of those not-for-profit groups who have made applications and paid the full fee, backdated to April 22. Is it how much would it cost if we were to backdate those funds back to those groups back to April 22? And would that be possible within your existing budget, David?
I think I need to advise firstly it wouldn't be possible in terms of it wouldn't be competent, Councillor Jones, because the regulations require us to have put the charter up, approved the charter and published the charter before I can apply any of these fees, including the reduced fees. So there isn't the scope to apply it retrospectively. The second point would be if we did have to quantify that, it would be difficult because we don't have any means of identifying the stage of an applicant. You'd actually need to interrogate, look at, identify every applicant and then go and check their status as a social enterprise, but we don't need to do that because the bottom line is, in terms of the regs, the charter would need to have been published first. I've only been able to put the charter in front of council today, so the reduced fees for those bodies will only apply going forward. They couldn't be applied competently retrospectively.
Okay, thanks, David. And just to say that I think the 50% is a very generous discount, and I welcome it. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thanks for that. Folks, we okay with the recommendations? We're happy. Thank you very much. Thanks, David. We'll move on. And item 11 is the Homeowners Service Members Officer Working Group Review, and this is Helen to introduce this. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Provost. Good afternoon, members and colleagues. The purpose of the report is to report the outcome and recommendations from the Short Life Homeowners Member Officer Working Group. Recommendations are noted at paragraph 2. Paragraphs 3 to 5 provide the background to the Member Officer Working Group, including the terms of reference and the subjects covered during the meetings on the 26th of April, 1st of June and 27th of September 2023, namely the statutory guidance for private landlords, the role of the homeowner service to assist private landlords and tenants and owners of empty homes, the Scottish Government's draft rented sector strategy consultation, empty properties in East Ayrshire over 1 year, and the role of the First Tier Tribunal Housing and Property Chamber. Paragraphs 6 and 7 state the progress of the group, which also reviewed the administration and enforcement of private landlord registration for the local authority. The group looked at the support and advice provided by the service to both private landlords and tenants, including information relating to landlord registration, understanding tenancy agreements, and bringing empty homes back into use. The Member Officer Working Group was satisfied that the scope and remit of the working group was met, namely to conduct a review of the role of the service, specifically its powers in relation to administering and enforcing private landlord registration relative to current legislation, in advance of the publication of the final rented sector strategy entitled A New Deal for Tenants, and to report the outcomes and any recommendations from the group to the Council for further consideration. Paragraphs 8 to 12 explain the role of the Council's Empty Homes Officer and the collaborative work undertaken across a number of Council services to bring empty homes back into use. Paragraphs 13 to 16 set out the range of schemes available to assist property owners to carry out necessary work in their property, either to bring the property back into residential use or for sale on the open market, as well as providing assistance to homeowners and private landlords who are trying to sell or who are thinking of selling their property. Paragraphs 17 to 23 explain the powers available to local authorities where an owner has not fulfilled the requirements to prevent their building falling into a dangerous condition under the Building Scotland Act. The Derelict and Dangerous Buildings Report, which is annually reported to the Governance and Scrutiny Committee, sets out the legislative powers across council services. The properties detailed within this report include specific buildings that are in a derelict and/or dangerous condition and which have either been subject to a complaint or formal enforcement action. Paragraphs 24 to 27 discuss the compulsory sales order, which is a legal mechanism which would allow local authorities to sell empty homes and land which has been vacant or derelict for an undue period of time to be sold by public auction to the highest bidder after they have been derelict for a set period of time, allowing them to be regenerated. The Scottish Government had committed to bring forward compulsory sales orders during the course of the last Parliament. However, due to legislative constraints and the implications of Brexit, the pledge to introduce compulsory sales orders has not yet been delivered. In September this year, the Programme for Government confirmed that a housing bill will be introduced and will create powers for long-term rent controls, support tenants' rights, and introduce new homelessness prevention duties. It also states the Government will continue to consider the justification for and practical operation of compulsory sales orders. Discussion at the Member Officer Working Group extended to the use of compulsory sales orders, and the group recommends that the Council calls on the Scottish Government to commit to introducing the power to local authorities to help bring empty homes back into use. Members, you will note the implications that are stated within the report. A new deal for tenants, draft rented sector strategy, was published in December 2021 and sought views on a number of proposals for changes to improve the way rented sectors in Scotland work. An analysis of consultation responses was published in August 2022, and following this consultation, a number of proposals are being progressed further, which will focus on the private rented sector. In conclusion, the Member Officer Working Group have carried out their remit and terms of reference and explored all the options as set out in the above paragraphs, and the group is now concluded. That concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Helen. We'll open up now. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Helen, for the report. It was a pleasure to chair the Member Officer Working Group. And yes, we had a lot of conversation that steered towards the compulsory sales order and the blight that derelict properties have within our communities. When we have so many on a housing waiting list, but yet we have so many properties lying empty in our communities. I think in one case we have a property without naming where it is that's been empty since 1980. That is not, a good use of a building or a sustainable use for the future for people who are homeless or waiting to, for housing. Whilst the compulsory sale order clearly wouldn't be for the council to necessarily buy some of these properties, it might well be the case that the council could strengthen our existing stock or our partners and other RSLs. But I think in general terms, we were happy with the work that's been done in the private sector team. In fact, more than happy with the work that's been done with our private sector team. I think it's fair to say, and I will name Karen Walker and her team as being, well recognised nationally. But we recognise the work they do. And I have to say, every time I've asked them for any information or to follow up and private landlords, they've done it without delay. So I welcome everything that they do and congratulate them for their work. But if certainly in terms of calling on the Scottish Government to fulfil its commitment to introduce compulsory sale orders, I think the idea would be that we write as a council to the Scottish Government asking them for that. And hopefully the housing bill that's coming forward will include something like this, and certainly it was something I think would be welcomed by our communities. Thanks.
Leader.
Thanks, Provost, and thanks, Barry, and the working group for all their hard efforts here. Absolutely, this is something that blights all our communities, and I would be only too pleased to write to the Minister in relation to compulsory sales orders, but just maybe note some of the other work that we're doing in terms of not just derelict properties, but derelict land as well. And I know that's a key focus that we need to have in the future. But just thank the group for all the hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, it's a good paper. I'm pleased to see this, and hopefully the Scottish Government can take this on. You and I have talked at Police Fire Rescue Committee about derelict buildings, and I just need clarity here. Is this just applying to homes? Because, we've got other buildings that are maybe not necessarily homes, former schools, even out with this authority, the Station Hotel and Air buildings that are liable to, become really damaged and go on fire. My own opinion is any building it's unoccupied for more than 2 years and it's deteriorating, especially if it's listed, should be put up for auction at its current value. So this is very good work, Helen. I'd just like this to go a wee bit further, but that's maybe something we could continue. And we are working with the fire rescue police as well to kind of try and move this forward as well. Actually, I was at Ayr Fire Station recently with some of the fire service just talking about these aspects. Coincidentally, it was just a week after the station hotel fire at Ayr. So we are hoping to move some of this forward in the Fire Rescue Committee. Thanks.
No, thank you. I think it was, Helen can clarify that, it was all buildings. Not that. Members, any other questions, comments? Councillor Maben.
Hi, thank you, Provost. I was just wondering if this compulsory sales order could also be used where the owner of a building has not been in it for a very long time because they're in prison.
No, well, I think there's maybe an aspect of that has been covered in the past. I don't want to say too much, but there has been in the past that has been the case. So bring David in.
I don't think government would look at specific causes of individual owners' circumstances. What they'll probably do if and when they come to legislate is look at it from the point of view of the building. If a building is not being used, I don't know that the reason really matters. Lots of people can be in prison and still own buildings that other people occupy. So one would hope that the ability, should this power come forward, would be that if we identify empty buildings, I presume the process will involve that the first step is identify the owner. And if you can identify the owner, you write to the owner, whether he's in prison or not, and put him on notice that you're about to take this action. So he's got a final chance to do something with it to avoid the need for the action. And you can, in fact, probably owners in prison will be easier to find than some of the owners that we can't find that aren't in prison. But I don't think the particular circumstances individual owners will be a feature. It will be the principle of, has that building been occupied for X period of time? No. Right. Are we thinking about taking an order? Yes. What do you need to do? We need to put the owner on notice before we take any action that we might take that action if they don't do something with the building, as we already do under the Dangerous and Defective Buildings legislation in terms of works required to make them safe. So I don't think it will matter. I don't think they'll exclude groups. The point will be, was the building in use rather than what was the reason for that or the circumstances of the owner. And it will be met by putting the owner on notice we intend to take the action. And whether they're in prison or not, the owner will be able to respond and either say, it's all right, I've got plans for that, and we can take a decision whether to proceed or not, or you get no response and we would then proceed with these orders. Obviously, it's not yet been legislated, so there's an awful detailed answer when we don't have the detail, but that's what I would expect to see from similar regimes.
Okay, thanks, folks. Oh, sorry, somebody went in. Look.
Yes, please.
I could, just on the back of David, at paragraph 27, it sets out that the guidance had said it's where a building had been abandoned. So it wouldn't be the case in the particular example you referenced, Councillor Maben. Thank you.
Yep, happy. Was there somebody online wanting to get in?
Yes, please. Yep. Hello. Can you hear me?
No, yeah, but your hand wasn't up, Sally. That's why I didn't shout. That's okay. Yeah, if you want to come in, yeah.
Thank you. Helen, you in your concluding comments, you made some reference to certain points being carried forward to the private rented sector, I think you said. Could you, if I've got that correct, could you just tell us a little bit more about that, please? Thank you.
Yes, of course, Councillor, through you, Chair. The focus of the proposals is going to be around a number of different areas. So, for example, rent control, ending a joint tenancy in the private rented sector, greater flexibility to personalise a home in the private rented sector, whereas at the current time there may be restrictions on alterations or decoration, greater flexibility to keep a pet in a private rented home as well, unclaimed tenancy deposits, and also greater protections during the eviction process.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, folks. Agree the recommendations? Agreed, thank you. On to item 12, which is the boundaries second review of the constituency boundaries update. I'll bring David in.
Thanks, Provost. Members, again, I'll try not to take any more time than necessary. Members will recall in June, Council considered a report and took a decision around the proposals that were being put forward then by the Boundaries Scotland organisation in terms of changes that were proposed here. The unanimous position of this council at that time was that we were minded, or we did object, council was objecting to those proposals, and we wrote, and the letter that followed up is the letter 3rd of July, Appendix 2, page 26. Sorry, Appendix 1 at page 259, and that sets out and hopefully reflects the discussion at the previous meeting. So having objected to this, the Boundaries Commission then wrote back in to Eddie as Chief Exec and highlighted there in their letter of 19 September their considerations. So we have a partial answer to who watches a delayed broadcast. Well, on this occasion, apparently it was Boundaries Scotland, because they said they watched it to understand better our objections to this. So that answers some of the mystery. In terms of, so we better watch what we're saying in case they're watching again. In terms of their response to that, they have taken on board the points that were made, and they were minded and are minded to modify their proposals so that Kilmores would remain within East Ayrshire constituency, and that the proposals that would see one of the polling districts split up, 109, they are minded to avoid the split to that as well. That's in the second last main paragraph on page 262. That then required a discussion, because what they're saying is we're minded to make those modifications. Are you still maintaining your objection? Because legally, if any council objects to any of their proposals, there has to be a public inquiry. It was at that time the Boundaries Commission don't seem to have a lot of time to do anything, in the sense that their timescales are always very tight. So we took that ask of the council to the nearest sounding board, and we had a conversation with the group leaders and those at 10 sounding board, where it was clearly and appropriately clarified and confirmed that the council would be, if asked, and this is the process now, that nobody was minded to move from the previous position of June. Nobody was minded to withdraw the objection. Therefore, what this paper does is advise we are now heading to a public inquiry in the matter. And as you'll see from the report, the proposal now, the further communication isn't there. It was an email, but in their email of, I think it was 5th November, October, they have clarified that they will now proceed to make arrangements. These are quite light touch. They don't run for days or months. It'll be a day or two, and they're proposing a day session and a night session. They've indicated holding it in Kilmarnock, but if council's minded, we would go back with a further response, which one confirms, in recognition sounding board has no decision-making powers, that the council has considered the position and formally maintains its objection. 2, yeah, we welcome the public inquiry, but ask that it be in Stewarton if possible, and if we can help them accommodation, of course we will. And 3 would be, well, accepting that there's the 2 sessions. It's not specifically in the paper. I suppose it's for consideration by council as to how we go forward with that inquiry. We've only been involved in one that I can remember, and it was officer representation. It was myself and Bill Walkinshaw along to that one. And unless members are otherwise minded, I would propose that as officers we go and represent the council at the inquiry and make the grounds of objection, make the argument on the grounds of objection as per the discussion and debate at the council meeting in June. So that might be me and 1 or 2 colleagues watching the video again. If that's acceptable, Provost, members, then take that back to the Boundary Commission.
Thanks very much. Leader.
Thanks, Provost. Thanks, David. No, I mean, just reading the letter again from the Boundaries Commission. You know, unlike local authority, boundaries are taking absolutely no cognizance whatsoever in terms of projected population growth. To the degree, you know, within 8 to 12 years, certainly not just the fact that the size of the current annex area will have increased. That is highly likely that Kilmarnock will actually be moving over that boundary, and so parts of Kilmarnock will now be, in the future. will be part of this new Greater Cunningham South ward. So I think we should be as vociferous as we can, and maybe although they say they don't take it into consideration, I think we should still look at projections where we can, just to reinforce that argument. Doesn't mean that the argument's wrong, that you're going to. So I think we should need to do that, and I would agree with everything that David and his team represent us, and that it would be probably more appropriate that the meeting be held, any inquiry be held in Stewarton, because I think that's where most of the anger will be felt, because I think the entire Alnwick community will be really angry that they've been dragged away from Kilmarnock and all its association with Kilmarnock and Irvine Valley historically. I think that's where the Boundaries Commission should actually face the music.
Okay, members, any further comments? Happy with the recommendations that we go to Stewarton for the public consultation? Agreed? Thanks very much. Thank you. Oh, leader, sorry, yeah.
Well, can I ask that we could have changed it? I have to leave here at 2:45 per urgent appointment or an urgent meeting. Can I ask that we take Councillor Adams' motion that's addressed to the leader of the council, so just to be helpful, if that would be possible.
Is that okay, members? That would allow the motions to be done. Is that okay? Yep, thank you. Yeah, we'll jump over the two next items, and we'll go to the motions. So motions, page 277, and the usual template applies. Julie will keep time if it's needed. We've never had it to use it before, but in terms of standing orders, we'll still use the protocol, and we'll over to Councillor Adams for the first motion.
Thank you, Provost. The motion, in light of the significant financial benefits granted to Kilmarnock from the UK Government, I'd move for the leader of the East Ayrshire Council to formally write and thank the Conservative Government for their support. It's not a political thing, it's just a good manners thing. I think as a local authority, we've done particularly well from Westminster in the past year. First of all, we get the levelling up money for Annika's Palace Grand Hall, that will hopefully transform part of the town centre. We've got Centre Stage, we've got the Dean Castle. The town centre's looking a lot better. It's had its challenges like many other towns in Scotland. The High Street has faced unprecedented challenges for a number of years, and I think this acknowledgement from Westminster of a significant amount of money could help act as a catalyst to develop the town centre, and indeed all our other villages and towns who use Kilmarnock as the main town. So I just thought it was important morally that we showed good manners and thanked the government for that. That was all it was, Jim. Thank you.
No, thank you. And Councillor McFadden seconding, yeah.
Yeah, I'll second the motion. So the motion raised by my colleague has been done to show our appreciation for the generous financial support from the UK Government. Unlike our central funding, this money will come to us and we will be distributed by us. As a result, we will have the ability to allocate the money where we and our residents see the need and where it will have the most impact. I do hope my colleagues are able to see past our political differences to identify that the money will potentially provide the chance to rejuvenate our largest town in our authority and kickstart some of our local economy. The impact of this additional funding will just not be felt within the local residences, shops or buildings, businesses within the town, but should percolate throughout our local authority completely. I do hope you can agree with me and formally thank the government for their support. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to leader.
Thanks. To some degree, I think the motion is totally unnecessary, because I always, whatever government, don't care if they give East Ayrshire money, I'm always happy to take it. And in fact, I think in terms of the levelling up money, it was when Alistair Jack came down, I actually thanked him in person. So again, with this, already, after discussions with Eddie, that we're writing a letter, because part of the issue with this tranche of funding, there's a bit of lack of detail on it. But nevertheless, we'll thank everything we get thank for all the money we've got. I heard Annika about the Dean Castle. I've thanked the Scottish Government in terms of their role, in terms of the HLF and RCGF. So why wouldn't I thank the UK Government ministers? Always make a habit of good manners, and that's something that I always do. But again, with some other things, we'll see what the detail is, and we'll bring up, once we know that, maybe even bring a paper back to council in terms of that as well. But all money is welcome here in East Ayrshire.
Okay, thank you. I think we need some clarification in terms of there's a motion put forward and seconded that a letter is sent from the Leader of the Council, and you've just explained, you know, I think everybody understands that, but there needs to be a status where a letter is going to be
100% letters. Always. I mean, I've discussed with Eddie earlier when we were drafting that letter. But what we had to weave into, we're looking for some of the, there's one or two questions in terms of some of the detail. But in broadly, in terms of the principle, of thanking for the money, absolutely 100%. We'll thank for money.
No, thanks, folks. That's I think that's absolutely answered your question. If you want to recap.
No, I mean, I did email yourself and indeed the council leader and said if it was taken care of, I would remove the motion. So if that would have saved 5 minutes if Jim, if the council leader had got back and just said exactly what he said. Thank you.
No, it's fair that a motion gets put up and it's debated. That's fine. Folks, anybody otherwise minded? We've accepted that motion. Is that okay? The second one, again for Councillor Adams, is 15.2, same page. James.
This a wee bit longer, so thanks for your time, Provost. So yeah, it was to call and speak on the motion with regards to the Wave Trust 7030 campaign. The Wave Trust 7030 campaign is an initiative led by the Wave Trust, which members may know have their Scottish headquarters situated within East Ayrshire. The premise is reducing adverse childhood experiences by 70% by 2030. Wave are focused on preventing child maltreatment through developing evidence-based strategies that are designed to address and prevent the root causes of child neglect and abuse. The 7030 campaign was created in 2009 after, following over 10 years of research, they came to the realisation that most incidents of child abuse and neglect could be avoided if we as a society gradually shifted our priorities and resources towards a focus on primary prevention. This, if achieved, would bring about a brighter and more secure future for the most vulnerable members of our community. And as its members may already be aware, the vision that Wave are seeking is to achieve already coming to fruition across the depth and breadth of Scotland. To date, 6 local authorities, those being Western Bartonshire, Edinburgh, Fife, Dumfries and Galloway, the Highlands and Dundee, have already given their full support to 7030. And what I find particularly encouraging is that when you look who's initiated the call for support within each of those Scottish local authorities, the cross-party consensus is from everybody that people in Scotland wish to achieve the 7030 goal. Every single SNP MP in Westminster has signed up for it. It was part of the last Labour manifesto. It's broadly speaking across all parties' support. I therefore bring the motion before the council with this very real belief that we too can come together with a united voice to play our own unique part in delivering 7030 across Scotland. It's not just a case of wanting East Ayrshire to jump in the bandwagon and follow the crowd. I brought it before the administration specifically because I know how seriously we all take the issue of child maltreatment and how we all recognise the multifaceted factors that are at work. After all, East Ayrshire was one of the first councils in Scotland to formally commit to the journey of being fully trauma-informed, and even as early as 2018, a police service put such principles at the heart of their practice. So by aligning ourselves with a campaign which is dedicated to achieving a set and tangible goal in this area, we not only have an opportunity to review our commitment to that journey, but to reflect on it, perhaps even collaborate with other local authorities who have already expressed their full support for Wave's work. So many thanks, Provost, to you and other members of the council for listening to me and speak about the motion. In closing, I guess what my ultimate point is, if you start on a journey, you need a destination. So I therefore ask you to vote in favour of the motion and put East Ayrshire Council on a pathway to a place which Wave have suggested is wholly possible to reach. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McFadden, yep.
Yes, I'd like to second Councillor Adams' motion. The Conservative group, which I'm fortunate to lead, recognise the good work that East Ayrshire Council currently undertake in relation to child development at all levels. I ask East Ayrshire to note the excellent work of the Wave Trust in its 70/30 campaign to reduce levels of child abuse, neglect, domestic abuse by 70% by 2030. I recognise there has been over 800 MPs, MSPs, mayors and councillors who have endorsed this campaign. I also wish to highlight the support that comes from all the political parties. I wish to highlight, as a progressive local authority, we are a little behind this as many other authorities within Scotland have already passed motions, and many of these have on a cross-party basis. I ask the East Ayrshire Council explore with the Wave Trust ideas on how to achieve 70/30 within East Ayrshire and report back to the Council in the appropriate timescale, 6 or 12 months, to indicate what would be required for the key recommendations of this strategy to be implemented and embedded within the culture and processes of East Ayrshire Council. I would be remiss not to highlight the excellent preventative work which this Council has already being carried out by East Ayrshire Council, and acknowledge that there is a wide understanding in all the services of the work of ACE. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor McGregor.
Thanks very much, Provost. I'd like to thank Councillor Adams for bringing forward this motion, and I acknowledge what Councillor McFadden said as well about the number of parliamentarians and other elected members that have supported the Wave Trust. Now they are, as Councillor Adams alluded to, they're based in New Mills, so in the ward that myself and my colleagues represent. I do believe I actually missed a call from them last night. It wasn't deliberate, but iPhones and dirty nappies don't mix, as I'm sure a few of you already know. However, other than a brief kind of point where they emailed me during a different election campaign, I don't particularly know too much about the Wave Trust and its wider mission and beliefs. And whether that's just because my family come from a Northern Irish background and there's a lot of instances where things at first seem, and I'm sure they are, perfectly in line with what I believe. I don't know enough about them yet to say that I would support a particular campaign. So what I would suggest, if possible, is if the council, as I'm sure we would all agree with, supporting moves to reduce child abuse, neglect and ACEs, possibly maybe members like myself would like a bit longer to actually look into Wave Trusts a bit more in depth before we would back what I'm sure is probably actually a really good motion, but just to put that forward. Thanks.
Okay, right. We'll carry on with the discussion. Councillor McMahon.
Thanks, Provost. I was going to call on Marion maybe to give us a wee talk what we're doing about the council as far as the ACES agenda, but I don't think I'll bother. As far as, and I know in my time here over the last 2017, it's been a top priority, especially for this council, and especially for me, running about the ACES agenda and trauma and information, running about trauma. Like Councillor McGregor, I'm a wee bit short on information running about the Wave Trust, and I fully understand where he's coming for that. So based on that, and thanks Councillor Adams for his motion as well, but I'd like to make a wee amendment to the motion rather than commit. I'd rather that we agree to the objectives of the Wave Trust campaign to reduce child abuse and neglect. Another race is at least 2030, but for me it's no commit, it's just to agree with their objectives. So I'm putting forward an amendment to that motion that we agree rather than commit, because I don't understand what the commitment means.
Right, okay, but have you got a seconder for that? Councillor Barton, second the amendment.
Yep, I'm happy to second
Yep,
second
yep,
amendment.
okay. No, thanks for that. We'll come back to the discussion. We'll come back. Councillor Douglas.
Provost, thank you. Whilst I hear my colleagues in relation to the Wave Trust and perhaps having they feel they don't have enough information on them. For me, I'm probably minded to agree with most of what Jim has said in terms of his amendment, but for me it is for us to consider not just a council but every organisation. There are so many organisations that are involved to try and seek to reduce child abuse, neglect and adverse ACEs, and this council does fantastic work in that regard. So I would be loath, if I will use the word loath to mention one particular organisation. I think we would want to expand that to say all organisations, including the council, who. So otherwise the wording's fine, but rather than the Wave Trust, I would mention every organisation who's engaged in this. That would be my proposal. But if Jim's minded to amend his amendment in that regard, he'll have my support on it. Thanks.
Absolutely, Provost. I'm minded to go with what Councillor Douglas is proposing. Yep, happy to still second.
All right, folks. Long day. Okay. Do we understand, folks? Is that okay? We understand what we're going on. So Councillor Adams has made the motion. The motion's clearly there in front of you and elucidated all the background to it. There's been an alternative, an amendment with a set of words that says, as it says on the tin, that's all. Oh, so it's no singling out one. I take it that's the body is saying it's no singling out one organisation. It's everyone, right? There's a clear difference there. Okay. Is there any other comments? Any other questions? Clarification or anything? Yep, David.
Just in terms of process, to be fair to Councillor McGregor, he was indicating, I would say, discussing what seemed to be might have been leading to a motion to defer consideration to allow more information to be brought. We obviously have the motion, we have the amendment. I think just as a tidy up, just want to clarify with Councillor McGregor.
That's absolutely fair, Kevin. Is that what you were leading
Provost, I'm entirely in line with Councillor McMahon's amendment.
That's very kind. No, I understand that. So we've got a clear. Is there any information you can give us about the organisation? No.
Provost, I'll ask Marion actually to say a wee bit about the organisation, but to try and be helpful too. I obviously have a separate role as I'm chair of the Chief Officer Public Protection Group, for East Ayrshire. And it may be helpful, I can understand why all of us would want to commit to a 70% reduction in, any type of, child neglect or abuse by 2030. And if it's helpful, if that's a referral to the Chief Officer Group for Public Protection to actually come back and say how can we make progress, towards that, I would be, if council's so minded, I would be happy to, take that, as something that comes to us. But if you want, I know Marion said we look at at some of the organisation.
Yeah, Marion.
Thanks, Provost. Thanks, Eddie. Yes, I did have a wee look at the organisation, and the information I'll share is just purely factual. It's not any opinion or anything. As Councillor Adams has highlighted, the stated aims of the Wave Trust are to reduce adverse childhood experiences by 70% by 2030, noting there are a number of organisations, politicians across the UK and Ireland that have signed up to that. As we all know, the Scottish Government have a stated ambition around adverse childhood experiences, and following on from that, they did establish a cross-party working group which had a focus on child abuse and child neglect, of which the Wave Trust were involved. And it's been reported widely, and as a matter of fact that this group was stood down due to some concerns about the Wave Trust in terms of their recognition of childhood sexual experience, childhood sexual abuse as an ACE. They have stated since that they will include that as part of their considerations around adverse childhood experiences. Looking at their website, there is an infographic that has that stated, but there is no further information in relation to that. So I thought it was important that members were aware of that information. Other than that, I think the information that I'm aware of is on their website. We've had no other involvement with them. Thanks.
No, thanks for that, Marion. Thanks, Eddie. It's very honourable proposal to cut by 70%. Absolutely brilliant, and that's what we should all be going to. But Eddie's, as part of Councillor McMahon's motion, Eddie has said that, and I suppose it would form part of Councillor Adams as well, no matter what one we agree on today, because it will go to a vote, I would imagine, there will be a caveat that Eddie and the team will put forward 2 members to show the workings of how hopefully we will get there, the workings of the Health and Social Care Partnership and the Council. Is that, am I paraphrasing you correctly, Eddie?
Just it's the Chief Officer's Group Public Protection, and so it's the group I sit on with the Police Commander, the NHS Chief Executive, etc., in terms of responsibility for public protection in East Ayrshire. So that's where you would refer this to.
Great, so it's our partners as well, right? I'm happy with that. It's folk understand where we are. Yep, so we just need some clarification.
Just then to try and distill where I think we're at, Provost. You obviously, members, you have the motion by Councillor Adams, second by Councillor McFadden, as set out in page 277 there, for EAC to commit to the Wave Trust 70-30 campaign, which seeks to reduce child abuse, neglect and adverse childhood experiences by 70% by 2030. And I think, subject to Councillor Adams and Councillor McFadden confirming it, that it would seem unlikely they wouldn't accept the additional suggestion that, as you say, with either the motion or the amendment, that we also add in, and that Council agreed to remit to the Chief Officer Public Protection Group for consideration of how best to achieve that reduction. I'll come back specifically because in terms of the amendment as I understand it would be for EAC to support the efforts and activities of all organisations which seek to reduce child abuse, neglect and adverse childhood experiences. But I think it needs to stop there, because if you actually replicate the by 70% by 2030, you make it meaningless, because there's only one organisation which is set up as the 70-30 specifically. So if you go to all organisations seeking to reduce it by 70% by 2030, that only takes you back to the one organisation anyway, so the amendment would change nothing. So I think it needs to drop the 70% by 2030 on the amendment for the amendment to make sense. And the amendment would be the broader then, support the efforts and activities of all organisations which seek to reduce child abuse, neglect and adverse childhood experiences, full stop at that point, with the additional remit to the Chief Officer Public Protection Group for consideration of how to achieve an overall reduction in these rather than specifically that target. If you leave the target in, nothing's changed in terms of there's no difference between the two. So if members are happy with that, then that's the motion and the amendment, the specific motion and the broader amendment.
Yeah, no, that's clarified. No, thanks. So everybody understand? Yeah, I understand. Councillor Adams, you still, will we go to the vote?
Happy to go to the vote because I do think it's important to go for the 70-30, okay?
Yep, absolutely, yep. So everybody understand, yep? Right, we're going to the vote now, thank you. Thanks, Julie.
Great, thank you very much. Members, if you could indicate your support for either the motion by Councillor Adams, second by Councillor McFadden, or for the amendment by Councillor McMahon, second by Councillor Barton. So, Provost Jim Todd.
Amendment.
Councillor Stephen Canning.
Amendment.
Councillor Ellen Friel. Motion. Councillor John McFadden. I have an apology from Councillor John McGee. Councillor Elaine Cowan.
Amendment.
Councillor Maureen Mackay.
Amendment.
Councillor David Richardson.
Amendment.
Councillor James Adams. Councillor Lillian Jones.
Amendment.
Councillor Ian Linton.
The amendment.
Councillor Rita's left. Councillor Graham Barton.
The amendment.
Councillor Graham Boyd.
Motion, please.
Councillor Barry Douglas.
Amendment.
Councillor Neil Ingram.
Amendment.
Councillor Peter Maben.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Claire Maitland is left. Councillor Beverly Clark.
Amendment.
Councillor Sally
Maitland's
Cog.
here, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Maitland.
Amendment, thank you, Julie.
Thank you, sorry. Councillor Clark, I've got you for the amendment. Councillor Sally Cogley.
Motion.
Councillor Kevin McGregor.
Amendment.
Councillor Linda Holland.
Amendment, please.
Deputy Provost Claire Leach.
Amendment, please, Julie.
Councillor William Lennox.
The amendment.
Councillor Alison Simmons.
Motion, please.
Thank you. Councillor Billy Crawford.
Amendment.
Councillor June Kyle.
Amendment.
Councillor Jim McMahon.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Neil Watts.
Motion.
Councillor Filson has left. Councillor Jennifer Hogg.
Amendment, please.
And Councillor Elaine Stewart.
Amendment, please.
Thank you. The amendment is carried by 22 votes to 7. Thank you, Provost.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, folks. I'm going to jump into, only 2 left. We'll try and get through quick. Item 13 is a proposal to withdraw the facility of MS Teams from hearings at Licensing Board, Local Government Licensing Panel and the Planning Committee. Pages 263 to 265. We'll bring David in for this one.
Thanks, Provost. I think I'll try and get all our reports for governance at the beginning of the next agenda. In terms of this one, this basically comes out of discussions with the various chairs and some of our recent experience in terms of some of the hearings. In essence, Teams is a good thing. None of us were aware of it or using it before 2020. We've all come a long way, even Luddites like me, in a short time, and it absolutely has its place. Personally, I think it's good for meetings involving fewer people where there's still that opportunity to get involved. I think the more folk that are involved, the more of a negative impact it can have on everyone's willingness and ability to participate and contribute. But very specifically, the purpose of this paper is to focus and invite council to consider whether or not Teams is a good fit in relation to specifically licensing applications and planning applications which require to be determined where we're taking quasi-judicial decisions in accordance with statutory processes that are subject to statutory timescales. So we don't always have an open-ended period of time within which to deal with matters, and matters need to be dealt with in an appropriate manner, recognising planning decisions can be appealed to the reporter and licensing decisions can be appealed to the sheriff. We've already reached a point where in practice the board, and the boards obviously stand alone, so council won't be asked to make a decision for the board have been invited to make their own decision, but in relation to the licensing panel and the planning committee, then what we're asking council to do is to agree formally to the withdrawal of the Teams facility, specifically where there are hearings to be conducted at either the panel or the committee. The position, as I said, we've reached in practice is that is already the approach we take with participants. Insofar as if folk want to come and speak in support of an application or object to an application in either setup, then we ask them to come in. That's so that we aren't relying on the strength of somebody's Wi-Fi signal somewhere out in the sticks in terms of our ability to actually conclude a hearing within a timescale and get a decision out to allow someone, if they're being refused, to appeal within the relevant timescale. There was one occasion where it might be extreme, but it highlights the point where an objector, one of a number of objectors to a licensing application, was elected as a spokesperson, which is good because we only listened to 1 or 2 people articulating all the objections rather than all the objectors articulating their own. The downside of that was for the date of the hearing, that particular spokesperson was on a cruise ship somewhere in the world, and therefore our ability to actually conduct that hearing would be dependent on the Wi-Fi signal from the cruise ship. I know that's an extreme example, but it applies anywhere at any time. Everyone knows there can be problems with Teams in terms of the signal. So we've already reduced the risk that participants won't be able to participate because of a Teams issue. But we're in a situation where the participants are in, and in effect, more than one of the chairs has observed that we're in a situation now where members still have Teams, members are still utilising Teams, and in many occasions we'll get more participants in the room than we have members. The real impact would be if we don't have enough members in the room to form a quorum. If Teams ever went down, we wouldn't be able to do our business. So what I'm suggesting and what I'm looking for is agreement that where there will be hearings, on an agenda, we don't issue it with the Teams, we just withdraw the Teams option and ask all members to come in and participate in person for the hearings. That's fine in relation to the licensing panel, because there's often other reports go up to the panel that don't involve hearings, and we usually know in advance whether or not there's likely to be a hearing. So the principle would be, if there's no hearings, then we would still utilise the Teams option, because I absolutely recognise the advantage it gives everybody. We all benefit from it. I accept, for instance, an example with a planning committee the other week there, I think it lasted just over an hour, and we've got a number of members in the committee from the overall southern area of the area, but for the two members furthest afield in Dalmellington, that would have been an hour each way journey time for an hour's business. So that's a 3-hour morning rather than an hour's morning. I accept that, but the balance is not just about the convenience of any one group, it's about getting the overall best fit for all participants, and therefore what we're proposing is, as I say, a proportionate approach, and if there's no hearings, then the teams would simply be offered. There's also reference there, we recognise, for instance, if a particular member was particularly stricken and indisposed, if they were in post-op recovery, etc., and it doesn't make sense to bring them in, then that would be by exception. With agreement of the chair, then if a request is received from a member for a particular personal circumstance, then that we could consider that in regard to the chair. In terms of planning, the slight quirk is, we don't know if there's an application on the agenda. I can't tell you if there's going to be a hearing till the morning of the committee, because we only are able to issue the reports the week before. People who have objected see the recommendation, whether it's grant, refuse, they see the report, they see how their objection has been reported, how it's been assessed by the officer, and as I say, how it feeds into the overall outcome. And at that point, they'll make their decision on whether or not they would wish to be heard. In some occasions, as an aside, we have large numbers of objectors, and as members will know, we put a lot of effort in. Lynn Young and Craig Young, they're not connected, Democratic and Legal, often have meetings with a big group of objectors to try and get them to manage themselves and present themselves in a way where they speak on themes, rather than, as I said, everybody just turning up and saying their own piece. It avoids repetition and duplication and makes best use of the time and allows everyone to focus on the actual issues of concern. So, because of all of those arrangements, if there's an application on a planning agenda, then we don't know till the morning. So we couldn't issue that with teams if there's an application on the agenda, because they can actually turn up on the day in terms of the process, and that's when we actually know that there won't be. In licensing, there's sometimes a little bit more leeway, and there's sometimes also more administrative reports beyond applications. So it's possible, more likely in licensing terms, that there may be agendas where there's no hearings and we can issue it with teams. So it's on that basis, I'm asking for council approval that we agree those arrangements. We can always review them. If they don't work, we can always bring it back, but agree those arrangements with the caveats that if there are definitely no hearings on an agenda, we'll issue it with teams, and if any particular member needs an exception to that due to personal circumstance, then that can be considered by the chair. The criteria would always be that we would always be likely to have a quorum in the room. That's the real key point going forward. So that's the background, and I would leave it over to yourself, Provost, and members for reviewing that.
Thanks, David. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Provost. I have to say, I never quite thought we would be going back the way when it comes to the use of technology, but here it is. In a world where we're trying to encourage people who are working or maybe don't drive, as one of our own members who utilises public transport all the time, or we have members who are in far-flung corners of East Ayrshire, I think the ability to use Teams, it works well. It works for the sovereign body of this council, which is the council meeting here today. Yes, I think at one point the majority of us have been in the chamber, but that ability is there for members to join online. In fact, there's a member, Councillor Stewart, who has both been in the chamber and then joined online. I think it was good enough for that. It is good enough for these particular committees as well. I had a look at other councils, and certainly looking at some of our neighbouring councils. South Lanarkshire have a hybrid position the same way we have had. North Ayrshire have a hybrid position, but that's by prior notification. South Ayrshire have a hybrid for both licensing and planning. I think the only exception seemed to be East Renfrewshire, which is in person. I did have a look at North Lanarkshire and couldn't make out heed nor tail from their minutes as to whether they have meetings in person, hybrid or otherwise. I just feel that in this world in the 21st century, if we're trying to embrace Teams, and we have done, and it's used by every other local authority, I don't see the need to have people in person. I agree, it would always look best that we have sufficient numbers in the chamber should there be a hearing, but I don't think it's imperative. and it perhaps is we can take a change of standing order, certainly, to let members, you know, have their apologies in, perhaps, or a requirement to have apologies in sooner than 30 minutes before a meeting, as is currently the case. But I think if it's not broke, don't fix it, unless, of course, and I'll take advice from the Chief Governance Officer, if we've had complaints from members of the public about members not being in the chamber. I'm always keen to hear that. However, and I know that, you know, objectors have to be present. I still think they should be allowed to deliver their objections and give their presentations online as well, I have to say. That's my view, Provost. Thanks. And I would, at this stage, subject to further debate, move that the status quo remains when it comes to these meetings. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon.
Thanks, Provost. I'm content with the proposal. There was on 2 occasions, coming to the end of the last term, where the licensing panel was just quoted. There was hearings taking place, and 2 occasions it dropped out prior to consideration in the full hearing. I was just quoted. Had that member dropped out and he could not attain part in any consideration or deliberation, that would have meant the rest of the day had been a complete and utter waste of time, not just for the panel, but also for the people attending the hearing. So it was on that basis, and I'm content where under certain circumstances where people cannot make it, and if you have a choice of attending on Teams or whether it's in person in the chambers and your car breaks down and there's no option, I'm going to ask you to attend on Teams. But where it can be done for licensing panel, and that's my concern on this one, I would prefer, as per the paper requirement and the recommendations, that members attend in person. I think also from that public perception where members are in the chamber, it would be better for them when they go away, and that every councillor that sits in the panel is there face to face in the chamber.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Richardson.
Yeah, listen to colleagues, Councillor Douglas and Councillor McMahon. I think I'm with Barry to a certain extent. I think that in the post-COVID world, things have moved on. The world has moved on, and we're not going back. So things like working from home, meetings through Teams, that's the way the world's going. And Barry's right in one way; it's not going back. But I think on balance, I'm going to come down on Jim's side, just because for the quasi-judicial meetings, say I'm a taxi driver and I'm sitting here, and basically my livelihood's at stake because there's a chance that my licence is going to be withdrawn. I actually think, I've just said that we're not going back, but I think there's maybe a duty of courtesy to that person for the people who are sitting, and it could be me sitting the other side of that table, to be in the room to listen to his side of the story. Because to be fair to Teams, you don't always get everything that's happening in the room when you're sitting at home through Teams. And I think when we're going to make decisions such as maybe withdrawing somebody's licence, which could have an impact on their livelihood, maybe there is a need for the elected members to be in the room. But I think for the, I'm with Barry to a certain extent. For a meeting like today, 75% of the time, I think Teams has got to be there. But for the quasi-judicial stuff where it's really going to impact people's lives, their livelihood, etc., then maybe we do have to be face to face.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Provost. Coming from the deep south and knowing that we have really adverse weather, there's a lot of occasions where it's sun shining up in Kilmarnock, but we've maybe got about 2 or 3 feet of snow. Now, I'm going to put my apologies in rather than get into my car and drive to planning. So where would we stand with that? Because the 3 members from the Doon Valley and a few members from the Cumnock area also offset on planning.
Yep, no, that's fair in terms of adverse weather. I think we can answer that, but we'll just keep the discussion going through. Councillor Barton.
Thanks, Provost. I could have approached this subject with David because I was sitting in the planning committee for just over a year now, and there has been an occasion where there's been 2, sometimes 3 members in the chamber. And we've had about 6 or 7 objectors sitting behind it. So it's that public perception as well. I think there can be a common sense approach here. The fact that the expectation would be that people come in, but as Councillor Stewart said there, if the weather's horrendous in Cumnock, I don't think anybody would be expecting to travel in that. So I think I'm also exploring the kind of idea of taking the planning down to the South Authority on occasions if the facilities are there as well. But it's more that public perception for me that we're making big decisions, and I think we should be there face to face, as Councillor Richardson said.
No, that's fair. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Provost. There is no bigger decision this council takes and sets its budget, but yet we're quite happy for that to be online. But, you know, for a planning application, a change of use to open space to a garden ground or something, we need to be in a chamber. I think the world has moved on, as I've said. I recall prior to COVID, when I worked in Glasgow city centre and having to come in for a bequest that I was a member on the last term, that often the meeting would last 3 minutes. Absolutely not a good use of my time at all. And, you know, a lot of us, in fact, probably now the majority of us are employed as well as being councillors. And, you know, it's the good grace of our employers that we are able to take time off. Many of us having to take unpaid leave, which is, you know, I think the prime example, I know the members, in fact, certainly 2 of the 3 members, I'm not sure about all 3, but 2 of the 3 members in the Doon Valley ward, I'm aware work full time. You know, it is a distance to come to Kilmarnock for a committee if they don't need to. The rest of the, you know, this council as an authority, most of our employees have flexible working conditions. We wouldn't be asking them to be in here, you know, 5 days a week or the majority of the time, or for certain committees absolutely have got to be here. I think we're taking decisions, and unless, and I have never had any members of the public come to me saying they're not happy that they don't see people in here face to face. Quite a lot of them have got comments about not being able to see their councillors, maybe at surgeries and things, but they don't have comments about us being physically in the chamber that I've heard. If other members have got other anecdotal evidence, happy to hear it. I think more maybe, as I say, Chief Governance Officer will have, if there have been complaints in that regard, will have heard it. And I do not see the need. I accept, however, that we should try, and where we know there are hearings, and I'm going to think particularly to licensing, because I accept the position with planning, that even on a rota basis, try and make sure people are in, that we've got a number of people in. I suppose you never want to have a position where you do have more objectors than members here in the chamber. But equally, that goes back to my point. I still think these people should be afforded the opportunity to join online. If they've organised themselves via an objector being the spokesperson from a cruise ship, that's their lookout. With the greatest of respect, what would we do in the event of adverse weather where we've just said it's okay for members not to attend a planning committee? What would we do with objectors, or potentially a licensee coming and it is affecting their livelihood? So I just think we need to take this in the round here and be very careful before we make a decision. Thanks.
4 quick points, Provost. In response to that, no, I can't tell you there's been any formal complaints about members' attendance or non-attendance at planning committee and licensing panel. It is more each person's perception of how those proceedings appear to the users. In relation to Councillor Stewart earlier, I would think that, and I made the point that there would be the option to have teams by exception. I would think adverse weather would always come under the exception, but that may not matter now. I think in relation to your point about council set budget, etc., I think, to be fair, it's not about denying the choice to members for no reason, but it's up to members to assess the sufficiency of the reason. But members make their own choices. And of course, we didn't have very many members out with the chamber for the budget meeting. We didn't have many members out with the chamber for the council meeting in June. Councillor Stewart, Councillor Cogley, Councillor Maitland have all been in the chamber today and are now all at home. Therefore, it is open to members to choose and to come to the meetings in person that they think is appropriate. What experience has shown is the planning committee and the licensing panel aren't necessarily two of those meetings that members would regularly choose to come in. And therefore, I take your point about managing it on a rotational basis, but where does that sit? Is it within the groups, or are we now trying to run a rota as to who's on teams and that? We'll take it away. And my fourth point, quite simply, Provost, and a lighter note is and I know you like your rock music, but as Meatloaf told us, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So having got the service review through and having got the fees paper through, I'm entirely in the hands of council in this one.
No, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Provost. I agree with Councillor Douglas in that, is it not better to have greater participation rather than people being in a specific place to have that meeting? I really don't understand why you're wanting people to come in. I can understand for hearings, absolutely 100%, and I will make a bigger effort for hearings for the licensing panel if I can to be present. However, I think, you know, in the whole round of things, I think to offer the greatest opportunity for most participants for the meetings, I think teams should remain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Provost. Sorry about this. I do like the flexibility of hybrid, but having chaired some planning in 16 LRBs in the last few years, it's very important, I think, that we are present in chambers if there is a hearing. Without a hearing, I have no problem with the flexibility of teams, but I really do think, as it was said earlier as well, that for the look, I mean, I have chaired planning when I've had one person in front of me and umpteen objectors, and it is not a good look for the council at all. As for, I've not had complaints. I've also never had complaints about surgeries because I don't make people wait for surgeries. I just deal with it immediately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Maureen Mackay.
Thanks very much. It's maybe a side to this discussion that we're having, and it's just Councillor Barton, you said about moving to the south of the authority in terms of taking some planning. As somebody who strongly, and I think one of my colleagues there, did not support and actually supported there being one planning committee for the whole of East Ayrshire, I cannot see anything other than that's actually a regressive step, because again, I think it is about the recording and it is about the facilities that we actually have within this space. And I think it is about equity of provision for everybody in terms of consideration of their planning application. So I would just want to make comment to that. Now, that's obviously for you as chair to make consideration of that. I share that with you as experience, having done this for decades. But, you know, every new administration are entitled to make new decisions, but I think it's important that I own up to having had a hand in ensuring that we were one planning committee. And on that subject, and I think David will know again, that we have seen that planning committee to ensure that there was always adequate support for hearings that were coming forward. Planning numbers on the planning committee were extended to 13 on the planning committee. I think I'm right, to ensure that there was never a point that the planning committee was not quorate and that objectors wanting to come forward to have a hearing would always have the opportunity to have their case heard, and that takes account, I think, of your earlier comments, and that is that we have to work within timescale remits. So I just make these as two adjacent comments to some of the discussions that have taken place.
Just a couple of points. I think in relation to that where Councillor Barton might have been minded to look at that was as part of the mitigation and impact of this. I think the two came hand in hand. So if this decision isn't taken, I don't think we'll be looking at that for all the reasons you've said. Other than where we have already in the past, if we have a major application in a particular location with lots of parties, we have taken I wouldn't say the circus, we've taken the tour to the town rather than bring the parties to here. So there's always that facility, and it's always in the discretion of every chair to agree venue and particular arrangements on a case-by-case basis or a meeting-by-meeting basis. What I was going to actually say, Provost, if it helps, because my greater concern is always the effective conduct of meetings. I hadn't anticipated and maybe should have had, could have had more conversations perhaps out with, but the bottom line is my position at the moment, and it's really for Council to agree it, but I would propose to withdraw the paper on the proposal to withdraw the facilitative teams for one clear reason. There isn't majority, if not unanimous support. I would be concerned at how then, if it is taken by a majority and imposed on the rest, how that in itself might impact in future meetings. So if it's not something that's acceptable to the majority of members, I don't think we should go ahead, and I would propose or invite Council simply to allow it to be withdrawn, because I think one where there is that clear division of opinion, I don't think it's going to help the smooth conduct of the future meetings. So I'll take it away just now, and we can perhaps look at whether or not it is an option or whether it's dead in the water. And it's not something I've done lightly, but I think in the circumstances, if members feel that they've been denied the option unreasonably and unfairly, I'd be more worried about where that leaves us in terms of future planning committees and panels. But it's with Council, so it's not in my gift, it's in your gift, whether you want to take it to determination or defer it or simply allow it to be withdrawn.
No, that's okay. Thanks for that. There's a proposal from Chief Governing Officer about withdrawing this paper. Are we okay, Councillor Mabin? Is this a point of?
I would just thank David Mitchell for that option of withdrawing the paper. I would have been opposing this all the way. I'm also thinking that there's a health and safety angle here as well. That we got into this with hybrid meetings because of a pandemic, and the whole idea that we shouldn't have big crowds of people in the one room. There will be future flu epidemics or future coronavirus pandemics. We're not finished with this, and the idea of gently encouraging people to drive in all sorts of rotten weather to get here to attend meetings is just a health and safety risk, and the council has a duty of care to its employees and people coming here to attend meetings. Thank you for withdrawing it.
No, thank you. Councillor McFadden was wanting in earlier. You still?
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you to David for the option to withdraw it as well. I mean, I think we can't avoid the future. It's going to keep coming. That's a stated fact. So, I think it's a slightly regressive step to remove the Teams meeting. And also the other thing we haven't covered here is all the people from the south that would then be coming here and going home, as well as the health and safety and risk of accidents and all that stuff that could take place. One thing for definite will take place, they'll all be using fuel, tyre, brakes. They won't be contributing to a greener environment. They'll be making more unnecessary pollution, which is something as a council we're trying to avoid as well. So I think on the balance, what we've got now is possibly the best way to remain. Thank you.
Okay, members, Councillor Douglas.
Provost, I was just merely saying that given there's the proposal to withdraw hasn't been agreed or seconded or been put forward, well, okay. If you're going there and that's the decision of council, I think that's what I would welcome. I can happily withdraw my amendment. That was why I was wanting to speak.
Councillor McMahon.
Thanks, Provost. Prior to any decision taken, if the Cherry Planning did decide to go into the South Authority and it was in July, I would still check for 3 feet of snow down in at the bottom there, I would still do that even if it was July. Barry, the point you make, Rune, about budget decisions, it's slightly different. If an elected member drops out, we could still go to a vote if we can't get that elected member back in. Where it's licensing, it's a different scenario altogether, where you're just core it and somebody drops out and we can't get them back. As I said before, it'd be a complete waste of the panel's time. It would be a complete waste to the applicant or applicant's time on when they come as well. However, if the proposal of the governance officer is to withdraw this, then I am quite prepared to go along with that. However, I may add, if it does come back and there is an occasion where somebody drops out and we're just core it and we can't take that decision, I would want this straight back.
Okay, folks, right, that's it. I'm closing that down. That's everybody spoke. And this is when I was going to ask any proposals were comfortable in being withdrawn because the paper's been withdrawn. Are we happy with that, folks? Okay, right, we're moving on to the last one. And this is the meetings calendar. Julie?
Yes, got a PowerPoint presentation for you. So the annual report in October, presenting the draft meetings calendar for next year, Provost.
Thank you very much. The only thing I need to raise, a couple of councillors have came to me expressing concern that when they accept, and it's especially applicable to portfolio holders, when they've got outside commitments to go to, including inside internal commitments with the diary, there seems to be a cross purpose where I know one councillor was hit 3 times at the same time for 3 important meetings. So I know it's an absolute nightmare for you guys in admin to try and get this all sorted, but if we could maybe try and get things into play where there is not just looking at the councillor's diary, but looking beyond the diary, that diary that's in the ether. And I know it's difficult, Julie.
No, that's a fair point, Provost. In paragraph 5, we
Yeah,
do say that
yeah.
we're still waiting for meetings from Ayrshire Services,
Yeah.
POSLA, IGIB, and the Commonwealth Leisure Trust. So we do try and work with our outside organisations to minimise that as much as possible, but we do realise
I know,
clashes.
I know. And I'm just going to say, and Kevin's away, but I was going to congratulate, well, no, Kevin, he didn't do the work. I was going to congratulate his wife, and I hope that they spoil that wee soul as much as they can. So good for him. Thanks very much, folks. It's been a long day. Have a safe weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost.
Thanks, Provost.